With that, I would like to invite Kathy Boden up to the stage with me. Kathy Boden is the Senior Vice President of Gas Operations for Consolidated Edison in New York. Kathy is responsible for leading over
Oops, sorry.
1,200 professionals in the safe design, construction, maintenance, and operations of the natural gas system in New York. Kathy began her career at Con Ed as a management intern. From there, she was, I would say notably, she was the Manhattan Electric Control Center manager during the events of September 11th. She coordinated the company's restoration of power to Lower Manhattan. Following that, she was vice president of Manhattan Electric Operations, and in 2010 was named the vice president of gas operations and spent over a decade running the gas distribution system. Kathy also sits on the Northeast Gas Association's board of directors, and in addition to that is on advisory boards for EPRI, GTI, Stony Brook University's Low Carbon Initiative. Did I miss any? Are there any other boards?
You're good.
Okay. And with that, so Kathy, welcome. Thank you. Get started.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Alana. Really appreciate being asked to come here. I want to thank the NGA. This is a great event. I know we had some folks yesterday with the contractor community, some speakers from Con Ed and from lots of other places. And, just to give you an idea of, the city as compared to the rest of the state, we definitely have a big ego. So I'll just give you that. And just so you know, also for this talk, I am not a policy wonk. I'm an electrical engineer. I've got 20 years in electric, 14 in gas. If you like roller coasters, the gas business is the best place to be right now. Con Edison is a combo utility. So we are a really big electric company and a pretty good-sized gas company. And we have, in the gas company, about 1.1 million customers, about 4,600 miles of main, 100 miles of above 125 PSIG. And really a very compact and dense environment. Our entire service territory is a high consequence area, so New York City and Westchester County. New York City is kind of unique in that when you get down to the apartment level, we're incredibly energy efficient, right? People don't use a lot of energy, and even the bills are not that high, believe it or not. I'm not talking about rates, I'm talking about bills, right? So in an apartment, you don't use a lot of energy, so you have, pretty low bill. That changes as you get out into the suburbs, but because of the density in Manhattan, we really, we're in a different place when it comes to energy use. So we're already pretty efficient. And we have a lot of different kinds of customers, right? I think we have about 40 to 50% disadvantaged communities across our service territory, mostly in New York City and Lower Westchester County. And that ranges from all the way up to probably the richest people in the world up in the county, right, and Manhattan. So it's a very, very diverse customer base. It's a very packed service density. And all that said, I'm super happy to be in Saratoga for spring.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, a little bit of snow, but so New York City's a little different, but I think we're a little different on the policy side too. And again, I'll just remind you, I'm not a policy wonk, but we're going to get into some of it. So let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. Maybe before we get too deep into policy or other items we agreed to talk about, I think it's probably worth acknowledging that last month marked the 10-year anniversary of the Harlem gas explosion. And I wanted to provide you an opportunity to comment on the incident, how things have changed at Con Ed since then, and what are you continuing to do to prevent things like that in the future?
So in 2014, we had a horrific event in East Harlem. And if you remember San Bruno, California, there was a horrific event before that. It was a watershed moment for PG&E. 8 people lost their lives, and an entire neighborhood was obliterated when a transmission line ruptured. At Con Edison, a utilization pressure or low pressure main, or actually service, T, broke, and in a very poor street condition, and that took down 2 buildings, obliterated them. And those 2 multi-story buildings, small, turn-of-the-century buildings, Also, we lost 8 people, many people injured. The Metro North was shut down for a day because of the debris across the tracks. And all because of really poor street conditions in the city, a sewer main, hole in the sewer main, which was 25 feet deep, a water main break, and a very bad place for a gas main to be. And the gas main wasn't that old, and it wasn't leak-prone pipe. It was plastic. So we have remembered that anniversary. We remember all the anniversaries, both from our own service territory and all of yours and all across the United States. That is a really, really important way to learn. And we have done so much since East Harlem, and that has been our watershed moment at Con Edison in the gas company. We had the NTSB come in and investigate. New York State rules were changed because of it, because of the investigation. I'm sure you've heard of service line inspections. I know some of the folks in this room do that. But the service goes to the outlet of the meter in the federal code. But in New York City, it went to the building wall, and in New York State. So that has changed and brought on a lot of excellent safety programs like our service line inspection program. One of the most tragic things about East Harlem was people smelled gas a day before, 24 hours before, and nobody reported it until about a half hour before the event. We were on our way to respond to the gas leak call when the buildings exploded. And we get there fast, but we didn't get there in time. So what we did after that is we really pushed the technology. We were very fortunate because our automated metering infrastructure was going in, and I told you we're a gas and electric company. We've got 3.5 electric meters and 3.5 million electric meters, 1.1 million gas meters, and all of them have automated metering right now. That built a communication system that enabled us to put in a communicating methane detector that's looking for gas leaks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we're about 60% saturated on that program, going to about 380,000 services, whether you're indoor or outdoor. And I did want to mention 80% of our meters are inside. So that jurisdiction goes in the building, right? So these meters, these little methane detectors, we call them AMI-enabled natural gas detectors. I know it's a mouthful. But those gas detectors are looking 24/7 for leaks of methane indoors. And what we have found is not only are we getting the benefit of an inside leak, and a lot of them are small fuzz leaks, but we are seeing outside leaks migrating in from leak-prone pipe or perhaps a damaged service, and that alarm is triggering and letting us get there and react to it before it becomes an incident. So that is probably the biggest change, the best change. And then, of course, there's a tremendous amount of change. You're going to hear it at this conference around OQ, operator qualification, and plastic fusion requal. Right? A lot of things went on in New York after that plastic fuse failed. Unfortunately, it wasn't a perfect fuse. Now, everybody out there today, you are all making perfect plastic fuses, right? That's right. Just nod your head, yes. You got to make perfect plastic fuses. And even when you make them in the lab, they don't always come out perfect, right? So you have to have a good environment for them. As I mentioned in East Harlem, the environment was terrible. You had the under part of the street going into the sewer, and our agencies in the city just kept paving the street, right? Kept sinking, they kept paving it, kept sinking, they'd pave it for literally about 10 years. And at that time, we didn't have a program. Today, because of East Harlem, we are out there all the time leak surveying. We do our system 12 times a year. So we leak survey our entire system 12 times a year. And we're out there looking for sinkholes, and we turn them in, and we mitigate them, and we work with the DEP and the DOT to get to the bottom of why it's sinking and make sure that our gas facilities are nowhere near them. So that's a couple things, right? A couple things that we've changed. It does take time, but boy, we are so much better because of it. Wish we could have prevented it before then, but we have evolved to a place that really has put us in an operationally excellent place, and now maintaining that, sustaining that is the trick, and getting even better, continuous improvement.
Thanks, Kathy. why don't we shift gears a little bit and talk about some of that policy you referenced earlier. So in New York State, we have the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA. These are some of the most ambitious climate clean energy goals in the nation. Why don't you start by sharing how Con Ed's clean energy plan is aligned with that and how you're supporting the achievement of those goals?
So thank you. And the policy that sticks out in my head the most is a clean electric grid. So renewable energy displacing whatever fossil fuel energy is supplying our electric grid today. And that should be 70% clean by 2040, or 2030, pardon me, and 100% clean by 2040. Who thinks that's achievable? That's a bad question. It's
Well,
that is the law.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
That is the law. And on the other side of it, we're looking for an 85% reduction in emissions economy-wide, not just on our energy systems, but transportation, heating, economy-wide, buildings, 100%, 85% by 2050 from 1990 levels. So those are the two that stick out for me. As far as Con Edison, you know, for the gas industry, I think that means, you know, we're going to be moving people to electric. For the electric industry, it means we're going to be building a lot of wires, right? Putting a lot of things in place. And for being in a combo company, there is a tremendous drive. We're in a tremendous growth period on the electric side. But before I get into all that, I just want to say one thing. The most important thing that any of us can do, and I think it's lost somewhere in our American culture, is conserve energy. The best watt is the one not used, right? And that's not really how we work, right? We have the biggest cars, we like big spaces, right? And really, we have to be thinking differently, because if we're gonna embark on this energy transition, we're really gonna need to conserve as much as we can, to bring the costs down as much as we can, to not have to build out as much infrastructure on the electric side that may be called for when you're just using energy, maybe not haphazardly, but almost wastefully sometimes. So I think for us, our clean energy commitment, we do have a clean energy commitment that goes along with the CLCPA. The first pillar is to build out the electric grid and support the policy goals, the New York State policy goals. The second is really to help our own customers green their buildings and homes, and that's through things like energy efficiency, Save a Watt. Anybody remember Save a Watt? That was back in the 70s. Okay. And then EV and heat pump incentives, things like that, to kind of get folks to be conscious of this and give them incentives to move over to electric. And geothermal is probably a big thing too. Some people may do that locally at their own home, but we're also, you know, the state has a proceeding for geothermal networks. The third pillar is reimagining the gas system, right? So this is our company lingo, and I think it's something I'm going to talk a little bit about in the New York State planning process as we go forward. But the next is greening our own company footprint. We're heading headstrong into EVs. We're bringing in a fleet of EVs or plug-in hybrids, and we're also greening our own buildings. And then partnering with our stakeholders. I mentioned that 40% of our service territory is disadvantaged communities, and we don't want to leave them behind.
Thanks, Kathy. You know, at the beginning of your answer to that question, you alluded to the question of achievability. And I think you're not the only one who has questions. One particular institution would be the New York Independent System Operator, has voiced, I would say, concern or caution about some of these goals. They've warned that there is a risk to reliability, particularly in downstate New York, with an emphasis on a significant emphasis on electrification and the transition from, you know, fossil fuels kind of always-on power like Indian Point was, to more intermittent resources like solar and wind. What role do you see, and maybe you alluded to this with your reimagining the distribution system, but what role do you see emerging fuels and technologies like renewable natural gas and hydrogen playing in the future? Is there a space at Con Ed for that? Are you exploring that?
We are. We're on the Low Carbon Resource Initiative from EPRI and GTI Energy, and there are just a tremendous amount of people working on getting these low carbon fuels to market. They're very expensive now. They're not, they're not widely available, and they will be used, I think, to power not only gas but also electric generation. So I do see that coming, and we are involved in it, but it's way down the road. And living in New York City and working there, I'm not a huge fan of putting those tiny little hydrogen molecules into the pipes in New York City, but I could see them coming in bigger pipes and feeding some of our generators. I think for us, you mentioned safety and reliability. We talked about East Harlem, and safety is paramount for our business. It's the most important thing that we do, and you probably all know that we're more reliable than any electric system. Even Con Edison's electric system that has networks, underground networks in the city, makes us 7 times overall, with our overhead systems and networks, 7 times overall more reliable than anything in the nation on the electric side. The gas system is still more reliable than that, right? It's in the ground, it's underground, it's protected. And so getting rid of that from a resilience standpoint is difficult, and you've got this whole infrastructure built that you'd like to use, right? So I do think there is a place for low carbon fuels in the future, and probably, getting to scale is the issue. In New York State, I think we think about, the farms upstate, folks that can actually generate renewable natural gas and get that into our pipes. In the city, there's less of an opportunity for that. We don't have a lot of industrial customers. We've got commercial and residential. And in fact, 45% of our 1.1 million customers are for cooking only. So that is a very large number. We get a monthly delivery charge because of that, but it's rarely used, right? But you have a whole infrastructure around it to support those cooking customers. That said, there's still, 600,000 customers using heat and using a lot of gas.
Yeah. So what do you think the time horizon is for Con Ed for natural gas, for maybe the distribution system, just the distribution system?
You want me to answer that?
Yes.
You do?
They want you to, too.
Okay. I think the timeline is, listen, I can't predict the future, definitely cannot predict the future. And there is so much uncertainty around this transition. I do feel it's probably, the policy directionally is correct. We want to, I think everybody, if you ask, do you want clean energy? Do you believe in saving the planet? I think most people will say, yes, I'd like to have a planet to live on, right? But when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of getting it done, the practicality of moving, I think in New York State there's something like 5.5 million gas customers. That doesn't include the oil and propane folks. Right. Getting all those folks converted to electric, that's a big lift. It's a big conversion. And bringing in, I didn't mention this yet, but you probably know this. We're talking about Con Edison, little footprint down in the bottom of the state. We've got 13,000 megawatt peak in the summer on the electric side, right? Just over 13,000 megawatts of peak. That's a third of New York State's energy on the electric side. We're talking about doubling or tripling that for heating by 2050. Doubling or tripling that load up to maybe the state load. The state's at 33,000 megawatts. For winter peaking, just in our service territory, building out an infrastructure that can accept that, and converting all of the 5.5 million customers across the state and the oil and propane folks over to electric, all in the next 20, 30 years, right? So I'm not going to answer your question.
Okay. Fair enough.
But I think that's enough of a setup.
Well,
right?
and I think you're alluding to cost, I think a little bit, or affordability. So we'll get back to that. But maybe before we get there, in the here and now, we are all still required to provide safe and reliable service to natural gas customers throughout the Northeast and for you in downstate New York. Given the significant focus on electrification and trying to move, the energy dollars to electrification, what's the appetite from regulators in New York to support the continued investment in the natural gas system here and now to ensure that for everybody that's on it, the 5 million plus that you referenced, still enjoy safe, reliable service from utilities across New York? I'd like to know what, that and how are you navigating that as a company?
So there's definitely going to be a fight over where we're going to put the money, right? There's a lot of money going into both systems. And on the safety side and reliability side, Con Edison has about 35% of our pipe is still leak prone. So I mentioned we have about 4,600 miles. Still got about 1,400 or so that is small diameter cast and unprotected steel. So we have done up to 100 miles. Back in the day, 10 years ago, we probably did 20, 30 miles of replacement, maybe 40. We went up to 100. We've come down to 90. Now we're at 80 in our most recent rate proceeding. So 80 miles a year of replacement gets us on or about 2040 to have the whole thing replaced. And you're never going to put low carbon fuel in it if you don't replace the leak prone pipe, right? You're not going to put hydrogen in that pipe. So we're still on track. I can say that the regulators, the interveners in the rate cases are certainly asking why we're spending a dime on the gas system, right? But the safety and reliability is so important. And I just read, I was on LinkedIn last night just kind of poking around, and PHMSA just gave another $392 million to some smaller municipalities across the nation for pipe replacement. So from a regulation standpoint, we know what the rules are, right? We have to watch out for safety. We've got to safeguard the environment by not leaking methane into the atmosphere. And in the Northeast, where we have a lot of leak-prone pipe, there's going to have to be a concerted effort to continue to replace pipe where we think we're going to need it into the future, right? So right now, that's system-wide. At some point, that may change. But even the gas bans that have come in to talk, in New York, they still have carve-outs for some of, the harder to electrify. Certainly industrial load, again, not a lot of that in our service territory, but restaurants, hospitals, laundromats, huge gas users, right? They're probably still going to be allowed to connect even when there is a ban. So this is going to be, I think, a lengthy thing. I think the regulators are certainly going to want to do as much as they can to meet the policy goals, but I think they're also going to have to worry about cost. You saw it in New York, right, with the supply chain changes. The new offshore wind projects became exponentially more expensive, and the commission came back and said, no, you negotiated, you submitted a bid, you had a competitive bid process, this is what you negotiated, that's what you have to do it at. And some of them walked away, right? So I think, there is a transition going on. We are all in it for the right reasons, and I think practical reality and physics will decide when we're able to do this. And coming down to affordability, it's going to be an interesting ride, right? Because I think in general, when you're talking about building out the electric system 2 to 3 times, that's going to cost more for all of us.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, Kathy, has Con Ed done any cost estimates that you're willing to share and the potential, and not just to the company, but to your point, to the impact on the end user, the consumers, the families in New York, and what are you doing to educate customers on the transition there?
So from a cost perspective, we, in New York State, policy-wise, to go along with the CLCPA, we have a gas system long-term planning process. So every utility in the state has to submit a 20-year plan. They have to talk about, it started out years ago as like a supply issue. Many of you know we don't have a lot of new pipelines coming into our region, right? So growing puts us in a precarious position, right? You can't keep growing if you don't have the supply behind it. It just makes the margins tighter, and it makes the reliability more difficult to control, right? So I think where we are is we're driving. We've tried a couple of non-pipeline alternatives. We've got a couple of folks that have actually done it, but it's a tremendous incentive that we have to, put up. First of all, you need a customer who's willing, because it's very disruptive. You're changing out all the appliances. Then you're bringing in, really an electric system has to be ready for it. And our non-pipeline alternatives have really been around dead-ended mains. So if we're in an area, we're trying to get the last few customers off so that we can abandon the main instead of replacing a leak-prone pipe, right? So we're trying to really kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but tremendous incentives to get this program off the ground. So I would say that's going to be a long time coming. As far as new customers coming to the grid, we don't have bans yet. We have new customer applications coming in, and some of you may have heard, we had because of the supply issue in Westchester County back in 2019, we called a moratorium. So when we called the moratorium, it was because we didn't have enough supply to meet the growing demand. Now, if you remember, back in the 2010s, we had an oil to gas conversion program. That's not that long ago, right? 2010, basically up till maybe 2015, 16, and into 2020, we doubled the throughput on our gas system by converting customers from oil to gas. Now, nobody complained too much that we were putting the oil companies out of business, right? But we were really cleaning up the air. We took a tremendous amount of particulate matter out of the air to burn clean natural gas instead of dirty oil. So that happened, we built the throughput up, and then we realized we're not getting new pipelines. So we've got to stop in Westchester County because the pipes that go through there are at capacity. So we've had a moratorium since 2019. We just lifted it because a compressor project went through. And we lifted it in December. We'll see what happens. But people can come to the company and ask for a new gas service, and they do. We educate them at that point. You really get personal service. So if no one's ever heard of the CLCPA, if they're not aware of it, we direct them to that law. We direct them to our clean energy commitment. We explain to them that the law is New York State is going to have gas bans in New York City, and they're coming. And with all of that education, the customer, not the plumber, not a contractor, the customer then needs to sign that letter and say, I still want gas. In general, so far, they still want gas. So we have been putting that gas service in. I think at some point, again, CLCPA is law, and so are gas bans. And when they come in, we won't be able to connect small residential customers and small commercial customers.
So, Kathy, one of the things you brought up a couple things I want to ask you about, but one of them you referenced during the Bloomberg administration that there was and then into the De Blasio administration, there's significant push to move buildings off of dirtier fossil fuels to natural gas. And as you said, it wasn't that long ago, and those investments have, their useful life is not over. I'm curious if Con Ed's starting to hear, I know you don't have large industrial customers, you said, but is there any pushback from customers because I heard some of this, we talked to some manufacturers in Connecticut last year, and the big pushback was, wait a minute, I just did what you asked me to do, and I converted to natural gas, and I made a significant investment, and I expected that was a 20-year investment. And now 3-5 years later, you're asking me to make another one. I'm curious if you're hearing that yet, or is this just noise to building owners at this point, and they're not really concerned?
I think if you just spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars converting and putting in an 8-inch gas pipe to feed your new furnace, you're not going to change that anytime soon, right? That's your heating system for probably 20 years to come. So I don't think there's going to be a backlash from that. But in New York City, there's a local law 97 that limits emissions, right? So if the buildings can't bring the emissions down through energy efficiency or other means of maybe putting some of their load on electric, they will be fined eventually, right? There'll be penalties. So everybody's coming at this in a lot of different ways, and I do think those oil to gas conversions are going to stand the test of time. And we all know people are going to look for new solutions when their old solution fails. Right? You got heat. One night you don't have heat, you call the plumber and say, I need heat. Right? Generally, we're not redoing our houses to put new heating systems in. Right? So I think that's where I think the transition is going to maybe take a little longer than we thought.
Thanks. Something else you referenced at the beginning, a moment ago, was about the constraints to supply in the Northeast. So I wanted to shift a little bit and talk a little bit more about that, and maybe touch on, for folks who aren't aware, because events that don't happen we tend not to really know about. But in Christmas of 2022, Christmas Eve of 2022, we had Winter Storm Elliott. It had major impacts on the energy infrastructure across the Northeast. I think it's worth sharing what Con Ed experienced over that weekend, over that holiday. How were they impacted, and how did you respond? And if it had gone a different way, what would have happened?
That's a big question. There's a lot going on there. So days before the event, so this is, take you back to winter 2022, the end of December, going into Christmas holiday. Christmas, I believe, was on a Sunday. So Christmas Eve would have been a Saturday night or Friday night, whatever it was, something like that. Going into a weekend.
Very cold.
Holiday weekend. So we were planning well before. We made sure with our commodity operations we had the supply. We had some extra pressure control folks on to adjust regulators if we had to. We had our CNG trucking station up at the time in Westchester County because of the moratorium. And we had our LNG plant ready to go, right? So we were ready. And we had plenty of capacity. We had plenty of reserve. And we knew the temperatures were going to drop. So the storm came across the Mid-Atlantic region and really had extreme decreases in temperature, freezing rains, freezing wellheads, freezing valves, loss of production for electric and gas, and essentially electric generation was decreasing rapidly across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. So PGM started going into like a state of emergency. They were calling for customer appeals, and that started to reach us. And I'll tell you how that happened. In New York City and New York, we have dual fuel. So going into this, people had planned to be on oil for a short period of time. So there was not like an electric crisis in New York from the ISO's perspective. However, in our mid-morning commodity operations call on Christmas Eve in our gas control center, we have daily couple different calls a day talking about where the gas is coming from, making sure it's coming where it needs to come, and making sure if we don't need it, we let them know. And essentially, this was the message from the pipes. You may experience pressure reductions at the gate that will not improve until demand is decreased. So they called me from the control center, Christmas Eve, and I said, so what's going on? Did we lose pressure? What's going on? And they read that to me. They had to tell me that like 4 times before I was like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And really it just meant that production was not, and we didn't know this at the time, we kind of knew this in the aftermath. We just thought there was no gas in the pipe. There was no line pack. And there was no line pack because there was no production. There wasn't enough production. And the people upstream of us, because we're at the end of the pipe, they were taking all the gas they needed for electric gen and just trying to keep the lights on. So you may experience pressure reductions at the gate that will not improve until demand is decreased. That's every pipeline coming into our system. What do you do with that message? And it's Christmas Eve, and it's a weekend. So how do you mobilize after getting that message? Am I going to have little outages, or am I going to lose the whole system? I'm going to have some problem somewhere. I have to address it. And the questions immediately are, where do you want me to go? I have no idea. So this was really, really tricky. Conference calls, notifications went out to the regulators, to the emergency response folks locally, to National Grid and I, Ross Torini and I were talking, Christmas Eve. Just tremendous turn of events. And just to give you an idea, the temperatures went from 57 degrees to 7 degrees in 24 hours. So we were ready for it. We turned on the LNG plant. We made the notifications. We started putting out customer appeals in our own service territory. CNG and LNG both went on feeding the system, and they were the saving grace, right? They were the things that kept the pressure high because the pressure to the gates dropped by a couple of 100 pounds on every line. So this was really frightening. We rode through Christmas morning. Everybody had their gas. Everybody had their electric. And then the temperatures started to improve. Little by little, they kept going up. And the pipeline capacity started to improve. So we really missed a huge disaster. So what would the worst case be? Literally losing the entire system. Every pipe had a problem. So the good thing that came out of it is it was a close call, because I likely would not be sitting here before you had we lost the gas system. And that close call, really, we contacted FERC. We asked them, would you, we know you're talking to PJM about electric and gas coordination and reliability, do you want to know about our story? Because it wasn't front news, it wasn't headlines.
Right.
It didn't happen.
Right.
It just almost happened, right? And you know what it takes to restore gas customers, right? This is turning off the whole system. I'm going to go to 1.1 million meters and integrity test every single one of them. I'm going to shut the whole system down, turn every valve, go to every home, and then I'm going to reinstitute gas. I'm going to leak survey it. I'm going to make sure it's not leaking. Then I'm going to go to every single customer, every single building, and do an integrity test on their service and relight their pilots.
Months.
Months.
Right? Months.
Months. And that's if we got all the mutual aid coming to us, but we all would have been in trouble. National Grid and Con Ed share a transmission system. They were right there with us, ready to turn valves and cut customers off to try and isolate whatever pressure problems we were going to have. So we averted that.
Yeah.
FERC did listen to us. They were very, very interested. And I think they've been able to leverage our experience to say how bad this could have been. And hopefully it's helping in the industry. I know NARUC has put together a gas electric reliability team.
Yep.
To look at this in the short term. So, really so happy it didn't happen, and hopefully it'll never happen, but that's the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably worth noting for this group, probably went unnoticed. I know not for you, but since that time, since Christmas 2022, you actually saw peak system demand on a not very cold day.
Yeah.
But everything worked again.
Yep. So January 20th, this past January 20th, we saw the highest throughput on our system ever, on the gas system. We were, I think we were at about 1,741 MDT.
And it wasn't in the it
No,
wasn't
it was
single digits.
average
was it?
temperature 23 degrees, so we did not call for interruptibles. We didn't take anybody off the system. All of the electric and steam in-city generators were on gas. It was probably about the sixth highest firm customer demand. So again, up in the 20s. But that gave us the highest throughput and not a hiccup. And that's because of Carlos. He's sitting here. He runs our
Thanks, Carlos.
gas control. Thank you, Carlos. But you wouldn't even know it. And it went under the radar. And not surprisingly, we didn't put out a press release.
Thank you. So we're almost up on time. So I'll try to maybe a wrap-up question for you. As a leader, what do you say to employees about the future in the natural gas industry for them and the ongoing opportunities that you see in our industry? And then maybe just put this all together. What keeps you up at night and what gives you hope in your work?
All right. And I just realized I didn't answer one of your other the cost for the customer.
Oh.
We have a long-term plan. Go read it. It's really exciting. Keep it by your bedstand. And
so you can fall asleep at night.
And the future cost for a gas customer is in that plan, right? And if we don't do something about the cost now for the bigger customer base, the last few that remain are going to have very, very high rates, right? All right, so when I think about people coming in, right? So,
Yep.
This transition's directionally correct. I think, most would agree we do want to save the planet. And we'll do everything to get there, but we can't defy physics. And I think technology solutions are still in the works. There's tons of them out there. They're not at scale, both on the electric side for battery storage and also for low carbon fuels. And the building stock in New York and Northeast, it's established and it's old, but the new housing units that are coming in New York State, if they have it their way, are going to be electric. And we're going to have to convert a lot of other folks to get there. I think that it's one of the most exciting times in the industry. I mentioned the roller coaster at the beginning of the talk. This is an exciting time if you like riding roller coasters, and I think a lot of us do. We need to be nimble and smart, and I think we have to attract brilliant people to the gas companies. And it's a little easier when you're in a combo company. I do have the electric side to fall back on, but I would say that in general, any utility is a really pretty decent, good-paying job, and it's also pretty safe. The utilities are not going away. And I think many of the skills that you learn in a natural gas utility are very transferable. Whether it's engineering, admin, finance, you can use that anywhere. Leadership skills that you develop in a natural gas company, You can take that anywhere. And I think even if you're going to wind up going into the trades, plumbing, welding, pipe fitting, all employ the same skills as you have in a natural gas company. And then you have the added benefit of having a very strong compliance culture and safety culture. So I think that works in a lot of places as well. So, there's a lot of uncertainty in what's going to happen, and maybe we're not so sexy now that we're not doing oil to gas conversions and we're not growing like crazy. But I think there's a tremendous amount still to do. And we really have to think about the policy. Everybody's talking about the policy. Everybody's talking about how we're going to get away from fossil fuels and decarbonize. And I think, again, directionally correct. Practically, it will probably take a long time, right? And while we're here, and we are the stewards of the natural gas system and providing the heat and the comfort and the warmth for the customers that we do have, we have to do that safely, responsibly, as affordably as possible. But we really need to make sure we've got the folks that can do it. We need the engineers. We need the boots on the ground. We need the people who are maintaining our systems during this transition and doing it in a coordinated way so that we're not losing gas customers and we're not making the electric system unreliable by putting too much on it too fast.
Thank you.
And just one thing, I just want to say a couple of things about it's always a downward spiral when we talk about decarbonization in a gas world, right? In a gas company, right? We're fossil fuels. We are mission critical. We are mission critical. That's our mindset all the time. We are mission critical to this energy transition. You heard about it. Our throughput was the highest ever because we had electric and steam generation on our gas system. That's not going anywhere fast, right? So it's going to go. It'll go eventually. But while we're in the transition, we are mission critical. And I think, the one thing that gives me hope, or the couple of things that give me hope, no matter what the adversity is, we always get through it. There's tons of developing technology going on. I talked about the Low Carbon Research Initiative. There are just thousands of people incenting new technology, bringing things to market, whether it's on the electric side or the gas side. The most brilliant minds. So I have a lot of hope that we're going to solve the problems, right? And we're going to get to the other side. And then the other thing I'll just mention, we're here, everybody in this room, the people that make me, give me real hope for the future are the folks sitting right here, the folks in our industry, the best in the energy industry. I spent 20 years in electric, 14 here in gas, and I've never met better people. We share, we help each other. We learn from each other, and as with any utility, when things go sideways, we all rush to each other's aid. So that is a great industry to be in, and I'm happy to be part of it, and I thank all of you for making it that way.
Thank you, Kathy. That was a great positive note to end on. Given the time, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm not going to take audience questions, but Kathy is sticking around, right?
Yep.
For today and tomorrow, so I encourage, to come up during the reception or during one of the breaks and ask Kathy any follow-up questions you have. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing your insights.
Thanks, everybody.
You.